I'm also going to edit this. So however it needs to,
It'll come together. Yeah, for sure.
it will come together. Wow. So let me say first, thank you so much for joining me on this pilot podcast. I read your book. I definitely want to go through it. I have some questions. I'm going to be probably as selfish as I can be in getting some of my own
Yeah,
questions answered.
love that.
But I guess if we could start, I'll do probably do like a bio in the front. But if you could, for the people,
Hmm.
just tell us, Jeff Nelson, who you are. Um, yeah.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I am just honored to be this debut guest on your inaugural solo podcast. So it's an honor. Thank you so much for reading the book. I'm happy to dive into it. Happy to answer some questions. So, who am I? I'm Jeff Nelson. I am the co-founder of Blavity and Afrotech, and also the chief operating officer, also the founder of a company called Chappie, which is an enterprise AI and data analytics company that works with that's B2B and works with companies to make sure that they can leverage AI and intelligent data to power their business needs. And most recently, I am now the author of this book that you've mentioned, Hacking the Startup Paradox. I did not have that on my bingo card for life this year, this month to become an author, but here I am. I've written a book, and if you can't tell from my bio, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm a concurrent entrepreneur because I'm doing these things simultaneously. And I had to learn a lot of this from scratch. There was no there. Of course, I've had mentors and advisors along the way, but there was never anybody who really said, "Here's the game," and I could just look at it and execute it. I never got that playbook. I had to make a lot of mistakes. Me and my co-founders, me as a solo founder, had to make a lot of mistakes. And one day I just got the idea and said, all that stuff that I learned, it's kind of this playbook in my head. And I talked about it to people individually, talked about it at a couple of conferences. But what if I could write it down and give somebody what I wish I had, which was, here's the playbook, and they could just go and execute it. So that's what I've done recently, and that's what I'm up to, and I'm happy to be here and have that conversation, not only about my book, but just about tech and startups and entrepreneurship as a whole, and sort of where I see the world going.
Well, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing yourself that way. And yeah, so you wrote a book. What I love about the book is like from the very beginning, there are two things that stuck out for me. The first thing is that you said that you don't like to read.
Hmm. Yeah.
That was one of them. And the other one was uh, a very fun Bill O'Reilly quote,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
that also is one of my favorite ones. It, Bill O'Reilly aside, but it is like,
The
it's
meme
kind of
is
like, well,
very
fuck it,
funny.
let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's,
let's do it.
yes.
Hmm. The meme is hilarious. If
So,
if people have
um,
not seen the video, please go watch it. It's a very hilarious video.
not only is it hilarious, I'm willing to like share it probably like every other month. So no, it's definitely hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to say, so you've written this book after
Hmm.
having what I would say a long entrepreneurial journey. You've experienced several iterations of it. Like you said, you started from the bottom. Um, would you say that even if you had a handbook, one that you're trying to provide to your audience, even if you had that, there are still some things that you can only learn by execution?
Absolutely. Even with the playbook, even with the roadmap, entrepreneurship is hard. If it were easy, everybody would do it. There's a reason that most people have a 9 to 5, right? That's and that there's no knock against 9 to 5s. I think for the vast majority of people, having a 9 to 5, working a day job, the steadiness of it, the certainty, the consistency of it, not only does that make so much more sense, but it is the most, it's like sensible, it is the most rational thing you can do. Some people are called to entrepreneurship, and even if you have all the answers, you're still going to have questions. And so, as much as I had to learn, and as much as I wanted to, provide the knowledge that I gained over the years and give it to people and give them a playbook, that isn't to say that you're going to take this and just follow it letter for letter, and boom, you've got a business. Boom, you're $1 million entrepreneur. No, there's still going to be stuff that you learn, that other people learn. And my hope is that you pay it forward and you sort of give those nuggets to others. And the reason why there are still questions is because, you know, I like to think of myself as I call myself an optimizer. And the reason I like that word optimize and optimization is because inherent in that word is that you are making trade offs. Very rarely in life is there a singular correct answer to anything. Most often in life, what you find is that there are a series of choices, and each choice has pros and cons, has things that are really, really good about that choice, has some things that are kind of trade offs, and some things that are not so good. And your job at any point in life is to decide which choice to make given your understanding of the pros and cons and given your understanding of what you're trying to optimize for. And so, as an entrepreneur, regardless of what playbook you have, whether it's my playbook or somebody else's playbook, you're going to be faced with choices. And you're going to have to choose what pros and cons you're willing to live with in order to improve your business, improve your life, improve the product or service that you're trying to bring into the world.
I like how you said that, and it also brings back my own experience with entrepreneurship and working, and then also back to the book. So in the book,
Mm-hmm.
you actually champion getting a job,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
is like super important. With getting a
Mm-hmm.
job, maintaining a job until your business gets off the ground. And as it relates to optimization, I am a new entrepreneur who does work,
Mm-hmm.
and I also have a family. And it's this thing where I have to figure out exactly what the balance is. And in terms of optimization, to me, I feel and continue to feel that while the jobs that I work, the employment that I have, it is not going to optimize the type of lifestyle that I want to offer for both what that I want to have for myself as well as for my family. So I feel as though I almost have no choice but to also see entrepreneurship is a avenue for wealth, which
Mm-hmm.
coming from my background, I mean, I'm from Baltimore City, there are not many entrepreneurs that I know. Most people that I know, if it's they're on the positive route if they choose to go to college. So
Mm-hmm.
that is the track. There's not many people that I know who have decided to do entrepreneurship, and there are not many people who have decided to go off and have like a lofty career. So it makes the decision even more complex when you don't come from that type of background. So in terms of optimization, even in this climate, would you say that a person is better off optimizing for both the short term and long term and considering both things at the same time, building their skill set in terms of employment and then
Mm-hmm.
also building it with an eye and building their own business?
Absolutely. And I love that question because there are a couple of points that I want to make on that. And you reference one of the pieces of advice that I give in the book, which is keep your day job, right? And I wrote the book intentionally as there are kind of four main chapters which talk about things like how do I, in this particular chapter, is how do I secure funding when I don't have any customers, right? And one of the pieces of advice is that if you need to fund your entrepreneurial ventures, keep your day job. And so many points I want to make on this. First, I want to start off just with the practical thing that I've learned as an entrepreneur is that not only when you are creating a company and building a business, are you creating something that you're going to put into the world that's going to give yourself hopefully, economic freedom, but you're also creating a place where other people are going to work and spend, a third of their life for the time that they choose. And as a black man, and certainly I can imagine for black women and women in general and other people who are historically marginalized in the workspace, coming to work at a company where the founder and the leader has experience where they've been at other companies and they know, hey, I did not like when I was treated this way. I did not like this part of the culture, or I actually like when we did this. And therefore, they can be intentional about bringing those things into the culture that they're creating. That's just a better recipe. I remember when I worked at startups that were not led by people who were marginalized, right, or people who are underrepresented, and it just felt like a frat house, like a typical stereotypical white, predominantly white institution frat house, right? And I couldn't imagine for I know how I felt, but I couldn't imagine for anyone else who might have come into that environment how they felt unseen, how they felt just the anxiety of having to show up in that space and try to fit in and also sort of lose touch with themselves, right? Because that was my first job out of college, right? And so
Mhm.
it's good. So I think I champion, if you have, like, if you're in college and you're like, I have this idea, I want to start this business, my advice to you is actually go work for somebody else first. Go work, because as much as you're building this
Mhm.
product or you're building this business, you are building a place where people are going to work. And if you don't know what it's like to work for somebody else, then how can you create a safe space for other people to work for you? So that's one thing I'll say about that. The second thing I'll say is that I think companies do this bait and switch on you, right? Where
Mhm.
companies and employers, they do this thing where they try to mask the fact that employment is transactional. They use words like, "Oh, welcome to the such and such company family." Even at Blavity, we do this. Part of the
Mhm.
Blavity fam. It's this idea that, well, if you're going to leave us, you need to give 2 weeks notice. But if you're being laid off or you're being fired, they don't give you 2 weeks notice, right? It's a family
Not at all.
until right. It's a family until, well, either they need to get rid of you or they need to eliminate that role. And again, I'm an employer. I lay people off, I fire people, I do these things. I'm not saying employers are bad, but inherently, work and employment is a transaction. And the reason that is important is because we've moved away from this idea where like my dad worked at the same company for nearly 30 years, retired, got a pension. That's no longer the case, right? Unless you got a good government job. That's not how the world is, right? Everywhere you go, as an employer, what I expect is that people who come to work at my companies, I don't expect you to be there for 10 years. I don't expect you to not be pursuing your own thing. What I ask is that, as part of the transaction, when I'm paying you and I'm paying you to do a job, that you do the job. But if you're doing other jobs, if you're doing your own thing, that's not my business, right? As long as you do the job that I'm paying you to do and you do it when it needs to be done and you're doing it correctly, that's the nature of the transaction. And so that's important because I think, we have to move away from this idea that being an entrepreneur is mutually exclusive from being an employee, because it's not,
Right.
right? Practically speaking, especially if you don't come from money, you have to work a job to pay your bills, but you also are gaining skills. You're also understanding what it's like to create a company, and I think you should do that simultaneously while building your vision and incrementally trying to get to a place where you can shift and fully focus on working on the business that you want to build.
Right. Thank you for saying that. Though I have to say, I am. Well, first of all, we never addressed the fact that we got the same last name.
That's right. That's right. I mean, long lost cousins, right?
Just right. I don't know if you have family from South Carolina, but that's where my
Not that I
Nelson line
know of.
comes
Not that
from.
I know of. But you never
So
know. You never know. Yeah,
okay. You never know. And then there's also the other side of the bloodline that we don't
that's
talk
right.
about how we get these
There you
European
go.
last names. So there's that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. Um, but so bringing it up and even bringing up like my dad's South Carolinian roots. So like I said, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family, so I don't have that
Mm.
in my background. And I am even coming to entrepreneurship much later than life. So how do you think, or do you think that it looks different jumping onto that bandwagon, trying to get your own ideas realized? Is that are people who are late stage entrepreneurs, or like in the, I don't know what you call it, like third stage of their
Hmm.
career, do you find that they are having just as much opportunity to jump in? Because there's a different, we talked about keeping your job, But once you fully immerse yourself in entrepreneurship, you're talking a completely different language. Like, I'm finding that I have to learn different things.
Hmm.
I cannot tell you exactly what a cap table or series A
Hmm.
is right now, but I know that's now something that I'll have to learn, if I have a vision for to be, to be fully in that league. So what do
Hmm.
you have to say with a person who doesn't necessarily come from that type of background? And there are changes that are just simply made, even in terms of your own brain chemistry. I mean, I know that you started in your early 20s. So
Hmm.
for the person that is approaching entrepreneurship in their 40s,
Hmm.
what advice would you give?
Yeah, so here's what I'd say. I think you are right, and what you're alluding to is that it is harder when you are in your late 30s and your 40s, and it's not harder because of the skills deficit. It's just harder because at the stage in life, you've got things that you can't put on pause. If you have children, if you have a partner, if you have family members for whom you're responsible, if you have other obligations that are depending on you, like when you're 20 years old and you're 25, 26 years old. Like I remember my co-founder, CEO of Blavity, Morgan, is a great example. Morgan, when we started Blavity, I don't even want to quote her age, but she was in her early 20s, young woman
Mhm.
who didn't have any obligations in the world other than herself, and she sacrificed so much of her life because she was pouring into building Blavity, and we were there alongside with her, but she was there in the trenches building it. Now she's a mom, and now she's at a stage in life where she's settling down, and even the way that she leads as a CEO now as a mom is different than she led as a CEO 3 or 4 years ago, right? I can
Right.
imagine what that would be like for her starting a company as a mom, as someone who has a serious partnership and is doing all those things. And so that isn't to say it's impossible. It is to say that it is difficult because when you're 20, you can say, well, that can wait, or I'm not going to do that right now. When you're in your 40s, not only are you up against a sort of clock, light clock per se, but when your kid, if you have kids now, you can't say, hey kids, no, actually, I don't want to deal with you right now because I need to get this pitch deck done. And so what I will say to that is this. What I often tell people is I often emphasize the number 168. 168 is the number of hours there are in a week. And
Mhm.
if you um, if you sort of take that number and you think about, well, what is required for self-preservation, right? If you say, well, I need to eat, sleep, exercise, those are sort of the basics that you need for self-preservation. If you sort of take 68 of those hours and say, I'm going to dedicate that to self-preservation. I like easy math, so you say 68 just to sustain myself, 100 to do whatever I want. Well, 68 hours a week for self-preservation is about 9.8 hours a day, right? So you sleep 7 to 8 hours, you exercise for 30 minutes, you eat food, cool, right? 100 hours a week sounds like a lot, but when you quickly allocate that, if you're working a full-time job, 40, 35 to 40 hours, right? If you have kids or you have a relationship or you have, commitments, right? Well, that's another 20, 30, 40 hours that goes right. So you quickly see that 168 number, which is really big, to that 100-hour number, which is big, that quickly dwindles. And I
Mhm.
think that's so important because it puts it into perspective. The challenge of entrepreneurship at any stage is one of a race against time, and it's about how do you leverage the time that you have to build in the face of everything else you got to do. When you're younger, the everything else you got to do is either smaller or it could be put on hold. When you're older in life,
Mhm.
and you've got more experience, you don't have that luxury, but you can still do it. And so, my advice and part of why I wrote this book, because a lot of the advice is in there, is because when I talk to a lot of the times when I talk to founders who are struggling to get over the hump, they aren't the founders who are like in their 20s, because when you're in your 20s you think you do anything. You don't need hacking. You don't need this. You don't need hacking to start a paradox because you think you do anything, right? But they are the founders
Right.
who are in the third stage of their career, or they are trying to shift into tech, right? Or whatever the case may be. They are the ones that need this advice, and so much of it is I think that there are very small practical things that you can do every week, 10 to 15 hours a week, while you're being a parent, while you're being a partner, while you're being a friend or a relative or having these commitments, that they're not going to get you to $1 million overnight, but over time, incrementally, you're going to build your business, you're going to build that brand, you're going to build this ability to impact the world and eventually make that transition. It's going to be slower, but it is absolutely doable.
Yes. As I was reading the book, I mean, I've been on my entrepreneurial journey for about 2 years. And
Hmm.
as I was reading the book, I still feel, I mean, I'm definitely still in my infancy. I haven't made it to
Hmm.
the million yet.
Yeah.
But what I did find is that the tools that you put forth was I was already doing a little bit of this, a little bit
Good.
of that.
Good.
And the book does talk about it being a paradox. And much to
Hmm.
that point, I understand that because it never seems like, am I putting the right pieces together at the right time? And really, ultimately, it is no, you have to do them all.
Hmm.
And, one of them will compound a little bit quicker, and then you'll
Hmm.
kind of, better understand the pace of it.
Hmm.
And not that you could put your foot off the gas. I don't think so, but you definitely have a better visual of, okay,
Hmm.
all right, what is the next iteration of this? What does the game plan look like? How can I improve upon that? So
Yeah.
yeah, the book definitely outlines that very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do want to transition just a little bit. Oh
Hmm.
yeah, sure. I mean, I like the book. I legitimately do. It's something that I know that I'll continue to reference, especially as I grow. I did want to pivot just a little bit and talk about Blavity, but I want to talk about Blavity in the sense that it's a media company, and it's a media company that grew in 2016. The
Hmm.
media landscape is, I think, in my estimation, I would say that it's changed at least twice now since that
Hmm.
time. Do you think that you is did you catch a certain cultural zeitgeist where the technology was right where it was able to be, and then you were able to combine the vision? And what do you think that could look like for a person who started a media company, i.e., me, in
Hmm.
in this time?
Yeah. I think that we actually caught a cultural, it was less of a sort of technological lightning in a bottle and more of a cultural lightning, political lightning in the bottle. So, the story of Blavity, we initially started it in 2014, summer of 2014, as kind of this aggregator for YouTube videos. We wanted to basically be the Black Netflix for YouTube creators, which I still think is a great idea. Still think it's a great idea.
Mhm.
If anybody builds that, make sure you give me a little bit of equity in there. That was our vision, and we, like all entrepreneurs, you have a grand vision, and you quickly sort of realize, for lots of reasons, your grand vision is not where you want to start. You have to start smaller. You have to start with a minimum viable product. You have to start incrementally. You got to crawl before you walk, right? And so we shifted from that model to really kind of just building this community that was, you know, capturing culture. This is 2014, 2015. So all the stuff that is common cultural parlance now, memes, for instance, right? Those sorts of things. We were kind of
Mhm.
one of the early aggregators and disseminators of that, and really kind of getting Black people on the internet to find each other in these spaces on Twitter, on different websites, and sharing content and creating content, etc. The kind of cultural political moment is really, ultimately a tragedy, the tragedy of Trayvon Martin, and then leading into the Ferguson protests. There was just this moment in our country, which honestly is still a moment that is happening. I don't want to say that it's coming and past, but this idea of whether it's police, whether they are vigilantes, who are killing unarmed Black boys and honestly black people, Black Sandra Bland,
Mhm.
a Black woman, right? So it has grown, honestly, in my opinion, to be um, a truly monumental problem that I think 50 years in history we're going to look back and just say, what was this madness? Blavity really rose to prominence in the wake of that because we have this community. We spent 2014 and 2015 kind of building up this community of Black people finding each other on the internet to share just kind of content. When there was then information and content to share that directly hit us, that hit, you had people who looked like us, who were our age, who were from the places that we were from. Morgan is from St. Louis, Missouri, which is right down the street from Ferguson. Um,
Right.
and not only was it about the information, but it was about safety. It was about people who were going to these protests and being pepper sprayed by police. And Blavity was one of the platforms that really was not only telling these stories, but allowing people to connect and understand what was going on and support one another. And out of that came Afrotech Conference, which, we started that in 2016, right after the 2016 election. We literally the day after we had the first Afrotech conference. And so all of that to say is that I think for a media company, yes, media has changed in multiple ways and it continues to change, and Blavity is having to adapt to that. I think the most important ingredient for any media company is what is the kind of cultural or political galvanizing event or set of events that draw people to your space. And we are in a space
Mhm.
now where I think that everybody everybody has a platform, which in theory sounds great, but in practice what you end up seeing is that everybody is just competing to stand out amongst the noise. And so you are incentivizing behavior that ends up proliferating misinformation, that ends up proliferating, I think, information that has little substance, information that isn't vetted, because everybody's just trying to go viral, right? Everybody's chasing virality. And these platforms, these social media platforms, the algorithms are designed to give you a fleeting sense of virality. Everybody's going to have that one post that they didn't see coming that got, 10 times more likes than the other one. And they're going to be chasing that high. They're going to keep posting, chasing that high.
Mhm.
Those platforms are built for that because you're going to keep posting on those platforms. You're going to keep driving people to those platforms, giving them engagement dollars and giving them ad dollars. And it's harder to start your own platform. So I would say, yes, there is a need for innovation from a technology and delivery standpoint, but there's also like, what is the cultural and political set of galvanizing forces that uniquely draw people to your space because they are underserved by all the social media platforms and other platforms that exist.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I mean, I what got me into media, I will say, in general, is that Baltimore is often called on for all of the wrong things,
Mm-hmm,
and I found that our city was being used as like the negative token,
mm-hmm,
the negative token. And meanwhile, I'm living in actual life here. There are
mm-hmm,
spaces that I enjoy, people that I like to see, and and this isn't a majority Black city, but for some reason, us being seen as a Black city doesn't isn't being used to benefit Black people. And
mm-hmm,
so I owe it to myself, and I owe it to my family and the people who look like me to try to amplify us in the best way, because I feel like there other media institutions have, well, I'll just say it. The Wire really did
mm-hmm,
us really, really badly. And it's like, it's that narrative that, long after the TV show is gone, the part the media has played has had a significant impact on the actual lives here. And so the best way that I can think to kind of fight that narrative is to position myself also in the narrative.
mm-hmm.
That's a Hamilton. So I
I
don't know if
love,
you're
but you're,
familiar with
yeah,
Hamilton.
yeah, but
Would
you're,
you?
yeah, yeah, but you're exactly right though. You are exactly right. And if I may, just to give some props and kudos to Baltimore, the first time I ever visited Baltimore, well, I went to a Cat Williams show in college several years ago with some friends from DC. The
Mhm.
first time I actually ever spent intentional time in Baltimore was a couple years ago. One of my good friends, Delegate Marlon Ampry, was like, "Look, you got to come to Baltimore." Sometimes people say things and you kind of say it in past, oh yeah, like, cool, like yeah, and you don't have no real intention. But to delegate Ampri's credit, he does not let he's not passive, right? And I say that in a great way. If he really wants to engage with you, he's going to make it happen. And he was like, no, seriously, like, let's pick a date, let's get you here so you can see. And I got to visit Baltimore, and I didn't have any negative conceptions about Baltimore because I'm from the South Side of Chicago. Like, we got, Chicago, South Side of Chicago has no stereotypes. Certainly, people think of downtown and the Magnificent Mile. Chicago kind of has this tale of two cities thing, which I don't think Baltimore doesn't have that fortunate. You're right that people only think of Baltimore as sort of one way, but I got the chance to go to
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore. And not only was I just impressed by the beauty of the city, I mean, it's situated just in a beautiful location. And I think it has the charm that you love. There are parts of it that have the charm about that you love, sort of about like places in Virginia and DC. But it also just has the cultural immersion of being a black city, but then it's uniquely Baltimorean, and it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, there's just so much happening in the startup scene, in the tech scene in Baltimore. So I want to say, props to you for being committed to telling the story of Baltimore and creating a platform for people to hear it from, a Baltimorean's perspective. And also just shout out to everybody that I've met in that city who isn't, who isn't like, hey, I want to do big things in life. I got to leave Baltimore. I got to go to Silicon Valley, or I got to go to Atlanta, or I got to go to DC, or I got to go to Austin. Everybody that I met in Baltimore who has big ideas are like, why not Baltimore? Baltimore is the perfect place. They're not doing it
Right.
just sort of as a like, hey, like my hometown, I got to stay here. They're like, no, like this can't happen outside of Baltimore. It has to happen in Baltimore because Baltimore is perfectly situated amongst all these resources, intellectual, natural resources, political, and economic resources. It has to happen in Baltimore. So shout out to Baltimore. I love it. I love it there. Can't wait to come back and visit some more.
I'll hold you to it. Well, thank you, but thank you so much for saying that. And you're echoing, like you said, the thoughts of myself as well as many other people. And to that point, events. So
Mm-hmm.
Marlon brought you here for Afro Tech Happy Hour. I happened to be there. I got into the tech space mostly, well, because I understood the relationship that is played between media as well as technology. I'm a big person that's on YouTube all of the time in terms of my consumption. And technology has changed, has become democratized. There's social media, the platforms that we have, but then there's also things like newsletters and building your own
Mm-hmm.
site on WordPress. And as I was learning how to get my message out, I had to learn how to build those things. So
Yeah.
that kind of put me in the tech space. But much like you also have done big events. You're in the
Mm-hmm.
not only in the media space but also in the event space. So
Yeah.
can you tell me how are they alike? How did you recognize that there was a necessary marriage between the two? And then also, how was the last one? I mean, you're just coming off of a
Yeah.
big event.
Blavity house party. Yeah. Yeah. So what events and media, they are similar in that it's easy to start one, but it's hard to make it successful. Like I could throw an event, I could say, hey, I'm having an event such and such. I could do that. Doesn't mean anybody's gonna show up. Right. So it's very easy to,
Mhm.
like you said, create a WordPress website and put some information out there. Doesn't mean people are going to show up. Um, and they're very saturated markets. So the question is, how do you stand out in that space? Our first event was Afrotech. And the reason, big event, I should say, we did some smaller events before that. But the reason I think events and media go hand in hand is because ultimately, when you have a media platform and you do have an audience, there is a conversation, there's oftentimes a one-way conversation from the media brand to the audience. And what creates it a 360 experience and really keeps your audience engaged is when they can have conversations with each other and then they can have conversations back to you. And yes, there are some ways to do that with like commenting and different engagement mechanisms on the platform itself. But when you actually bring those people together and let them see other people who are passionate about this information, who are consuming this content, and they can see each other, they can see that they're not alone. There's a lot of power in that. And Blavity, before Afrotech, we were throwing parties, we were having kind of one-off brunches and day parties and things like that that would get, dozens of people, maybe hundreds of people. But we had a vision of scaling to thousands and even tens of thousands of people. And we wanted to bring those people together for a purpose. What we found as an opportunity is that back in 2016, when we were starting Afrotech, companies they didn't know how to find and hire black talent. And now it's kind of ironic to say that in an era where DE&I is under attack, like actively under attack. I think that problem is even more paramount than it was then. But the problem, which is when companies say, we value diversity, we just don't know where to find them. And instead of, and everybody sort of solved that problem and saying, well, you should go here, you should go here, you should go here. What we decided to do with that was say, no, stay where you are. You're in Silicon Valley, stay where you are. We'll come to you. So we had our first Afrotech at a mall in San Francisco. 500, maybe 800 people showed up to not only talk about professional development, entrepreneurship, and excelling in tech, but to engage the 8 or so sponsors we had who were there saying, look, okay, we'll recruit. Bring your resumes. We'll hire people. And we grew that from 800 people in 2016 to now in Houston this year in 2024, we're expecting, 35, 40, maybe 50,000 people to show up. And, again, that's been 9 years, 8, 9 years in the making. We didn't get there overnight. But I say that because it's so important when you have these media brands to give that audience this ability to actually connect with one another and to make that conversation more than just, the brand to the audience, but to have that conversation amongst themselves. And as you alluded to, this year we had our first other big event, which was our Blavity House Party Music Festival. And this time, what we were increasingly doing with Afrotech was having a music component, because what is special about Afrotech is that it's like Black tech homecoming. It's the one time of the year where Black people in tech who go to these companies and they are the only Black person, or they're like the representative for all Black people to their company, where they can actually show up and be fully themselves. During the day, they can give a talk, they can recruit and hire, and then at night they can go to the after party and they can twerk, they can turn up, they can do whatever, have a great time, and never do they have to worry about, am I being judged? Am I ruining my brand? Are people going to look at me and be like, oh, I didn't know you got down like that? They can just fully be themselves, because to be Black is to be everything. It is not a monolith. It is to have a spectrum of just greatness running through you. And we increasingly saw the need for people to have this outlet where they could come together and just have fun, listen to great music, meet people, find their boo, find a significant other, just sort of network amongst Black excellence. And so we decided to start a music festival. We just had the inaugural version of that in Nashville, which was an amazing time. With any big event, things don't always go according to plan. But what I will say, and I'm happy to talk about that more if you're interested, but what I will say is the team, we've gotten really good at doing big events, and we responded really, really well. I think that the people who were there had a great time, and I'm looking forward to happening again next year.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad. It was in my plans to
Hmm.
hopefully go to house party, and I've never been to Afrotech, but
We're gonna
I'm
make,
coming
yeah,
to know.
Afro Tech and House
I,
Party next year. We will make it happen. I'll be in Baltimore. You're gonna hold me to that, and I'm gonna hold you to Afro Tech and Blavity House Party.
I got you. You got time for a 5 minute
I do.
rapid?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, because I want to throw out some questions. Well, throw out
Hmm.
some words and just see how you feel. We might not have to be on it too long, but just
Okay.
I figured. So let's start.
So am I saying the first thing that
Um,
comes to my mind?
the first thing that comes to your mind,
Okay.
um, legacy.
Jay-Z. I could just think about that song Legacy, 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 where he actually name drops Afrotech.
Oh
He
wow.
he
Okay.
actually he actually mentions Afrotech in the lyrics. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Well, legacy cemented. So
there we
there's
go.
that. Um, Forbes.
Oh, um, 30 under 30 list. My co-founders, Morgan and Aaron, made it. I was not included on that. I don't know why, but shout out to Morgan and Aaron. They were Forbes 30 under 30. The one of the few who are not actual scammers on that list. They made that.
Oh,
Forbes 30 under 30. That list is like a who's who of future scammers, depending upon which one you're looking at. But no, my co-founders are great, and they deserve that honor for sure.
okay. I think a lot of people know that now, but I'm glad to hear
Yeah,
that there are
yeah,
still some winners in the
yeah.
bunch, and I know Morgan is one of them. Um,
Mhm.
Jason Lee.
Jason Lee was at Afrotech last year. He's a personality. He's a personality for sure, and he has a platform. What I will say about the platforms like Jason Lee's platform and even the Shade Room. The Shade Room was a member of Blavity's extended ad network. We ran their ad infrastructure for quite some time. I think that all these platforms are important because there are groups in our community who that's how we connect. That's how we come together and we push the culture forward. So I think the Jason Lees of the world, the Shade Rooms of the world, those are platforms that are as important as Blavity. So shout out to Jason Lee for coming to Afrotech last year and hey, keep doing your thing.
Yeah. No, I'm not supposed to have much input, but I will say you're right. I mean, I love them both. And I think I
Hmm.
was just listening to Morgan earlier, and her saying like there is, you can't serve everyone. And so you do have
Correct.
to have this space. So I love it. But back to the questions.
Hmm.
Well, venture backed company.
Don't do it. Which is ironic coming from somebody that has a venture back company. You know, if you notice in my book, the last chapter, which is secure funding without customers, I don't talk in that about chasing VC dollars. And again, part of that is because typically VCs are not going to fund you unless you have customers. So if you don't have customers, that's not even an option. But I truly do believe, and I want to give a shout out to a Black woman based in Atlanta, Jewel Burke Solomon, who was the founder of PartPick, who is now head of Google for Entrepreneurs, who now has her own VC fund. She was one of the early proponents of companies building without venture capital, and even with her fund, their model, it's a different model where they're actually trying to give people a little bit of capital to get them to a point where they can be profitable, where they can be self-sustained companies instead of being companies that are going to raise a Series A and a Series B and a Series D and um, when you the best funding you can get is customer funding. And so, all the effort that it takes to actually raise venture funding, if you put all that effort into following the tips that I have in this
Mhm.
book, if you think about your 168 hours in a week, if it takes you 20 hours a week to chase VC funding, if you spend that 20 hours on trying to get a customer, right? Whether you're building a product or you're getting customers without a product, if you spend 20 hours a week or however much time you have doing that, in the long run, that's going to be so much better for you. Customer funding is non-dilutive, and it actually allows you to build a real business, right? There are so many VC-backed companies who aren't even good businesses, right? And if your goal is to actually build something that lasts, don't chase the VC checks. I mean, if that's the path for you, sure, but for the vast majority of entrepreneurs that I know, they'd be better off going a different route.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, this is me just outside looking in and even learning about it. I think that venture backed companies are also just like dying. I think there
Mhm.
was in some way an opportunity for people to make a run on money, where money was greatly available for the people who knew to tap into that resource. But those were probably projects that were never meant to actually be
Mhm.
anything substantive to begin with. And
Yeah,
so, if you want something real, like you said, actually build customers. I
exactly.
got one last one. thought
Okay.
leadership? It's in your book.
I think yeah, it's so important. I think everybody
Hmm.
should be cultivating thought leadership. I talk about it in the book, monetize thought leadership. I think especially if you're trying to build a media brand, because that's ultimately what Blavity did and continues to do. The reason why brands want to work with us is because we're looked at as thought leaders, rightfully or wrongfully. We're looked at as thought leaders when it comes to the intersection of Black culture, Black excellence, and in community. And so I think that every entrepreneur, regardless of where you are, you need to be using your platform to get information out there. That's ultimately why I wrote this book, because I had these ideas in my head and I needed to be able to point to somewhere and be like, look, I know this stuff. Go check it out. So, yes, thought leadership is very, very important.
Okay, I think that's a perfect way to end. Thank you so
Awesome.
much, Jeff, for coming on. I hope that you had a good time,
Had a great
and
time.
great. I look forward to being able to continue this conversation and invite you back to Baltimore. And like you said, I'll be at Afrotech and Blavity House Party.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. Start recording.